Well, CBS News aviation and safety analyst Mark Rosenker is a former NTSB chairman. He joins me on the phone right now. Okay, Mark, listen, we just heard Marty Martinez, who's on that plane, recount what happened, and it sounded absolutely terrifying. What he says was confirmed to him by the crew was that there was an explosion in the left engine. They lost the left engine. When you hear that, what do you think could have occurred?
It sounded potentially like what we call an uncontained failure, where not only does the aircraft engine stop operating and explode, but parts of the engine itself actually depart from the engine, potentially maybe into the side of the aircraft, maybe into a wing. This loss of the window is something that I have not heard of a typical uncontained failure. The NTSB, I am sure, will be launching very quickly to the site where they will begin to take over this aircraft, begin the inspection, document the scene, and begin bringing the black boxes back to Washington for reading. And then, of course, the next step will be to take that engine, tear it down so they can find out exactly what happened.
Yeah, you talk about the window. I mean, when I think about windows on planes, it looks like the glass is pretty thick. It looks like there's double pane. It looks like the type of glass that it would be very difficult to shatter it all the way through.
Absolutely, and that's why this is going to be looked at very carefully. Did a piece of the engine itself strike the window, and thereby, when you combine that with the compression of the inside of the cabin, that pressure would then give you the explosion, the loss of the window, and then, of course, the rapid decompression.
Okay, so Marty talks about, suddenly after that, the plane felt like it hit turbulence. It started to descend quite rapidly. Tell me what's happening. What would the pilot be experiencing, and what would be the challenge for the pilot?
The pilot immediately is going to know that he has lost his engine, and he's going to have to take countermeasures. He's going to have to get down onto the ground as quickly as possible. He does not necessarily know yet if there is a fire, but he will do whatever he can to make sure that he is flying that aircraft as safely as he possibly can, notifying air traffic control that he has lost an engine and that he immediately needs to get onto the ground, and they should clear the airspace for him.
Now, Marty also said that he was under the impression that the plane had lost hydraulics, and so the landing was particularly rough. Can you talk us through that?
Potentially, if this was an uncontained failure, shrapnel could have struck a hydraulic line and thereby losing the hydraulic fluid. There are redundancies built into the 737. It's a very safe aircraft. So, in fact, these pilots, though, are trained routinely for various emergencies, including the loss of an engine.
When we're looking at the plane right now on the tarmac here in Philadelphia, it appears as if there's a large amount of fluid in the back. I can't tell if it's foam because it looks sort of white from the way the angle of the camera. But what could that fluid be?
Well, it could be fuel. It could be hydraulic fuel. It could be a remnant from the engine itself in what it was burning. So we just don't know. They'll look at that, of course. They're going to document this aircraft very carefully. This will be a meticulous, methodical examination. They will be looking at the maintenance records. They will be talking to the crew. They'll do a 72-hour history of the crew. They'll, again, be very, very interested in when this aircraft was last maintained on its engine.
So it looks like the passengers were really just taken off the plane a short time ago. If there's fuel out there, is there a risk?
Well, it depends. Remember, there are people that are seeing the airplane itself, and if they saw a fire, they would be alerting the cabin crew and the cockpit crew. So I don't know if they used the evacuation system, which would be the slides, or if they took them off with regular air stairs.
Yeah, it looks like they just, we're looking at the video now, it looks like they were able to walk off on the stairs. You mentioned, how thorough the investigation will be moving forward. Will that include talking to the passengers and getting their sort of version of what happened?
Absolutely. The NTSB does a meticulous examination, including witness interviews. They will be looking at all kinds of people that are involved in this particular flight, including dispatch, maintenance, And, of course, the pilots themselves, they'll be looking at the training records of the pilots. But clearly it looks like we have a good outcome, a safe landing where everybody was able to walk off the aircraft.
So listen, Mark, you are an expert in this area. You know a lot about these planes, about the aviation industry. How common is this?
It happens that you lose an engine, but an uncontained failure is very, very rare, but can be very dangerous. But if you take a look at the statistics, we're talking about more than 9 years since we've had a fatal accident in the United States from a U.S. carrier. So the maintenance is being done as well as we believe it should be. But again, complacency should never set in. That is why we have such a very safe industry. The training of our pilots, the manufacturing of these products, both the aircraft and the engines themselves, the maintenance of them, and the oversight by the FAA. When you combine all of that, you should be getting a very good outcome. But with that, we must find out exactly what happened so that we can prepare to make sure that this never happens again.
You know, here at CBS, we're still talking about the 60 Minutes report on Allegiant Airlines, not only on Allegiant and its record, but also on how the FAA has been dealing with its record of damage and various other things going wrong with their aircrafts. And then you see something like this. It makes you a little bit uneasy about just how safe the planes are. You mentioned that we haven't had a fatal plane crash in this country in a very, very long time. Is traveling by air still safe?
Absolutely. The most dangerous part of the flight, though, is your ride in an automobile or a bus to and from the airport.
Really?
Absolutely. 6 million accidents a year, 3 million injuries, 40,000 fatalities. We see in the United States 30,000 operations every day of flights taking off and landing. And again, I think this is a tribute to the incredible airmanship of the two pilots. They were able to immediately assess what was going on and make sure that they could get this airplane down at the closest airport possible.
So listen, Mark, I want to go back to this engine failure, for lack of a better term. You said what you thought it sounded like. What would the possible causes be? What would cause an engine to explode?
There are a number of things that potentially could go wrong with an engine. There are thousands and thousands of parts moving at great speed at great temperatures. Something could break, something could crack. It may have ingested something, we just don't know. The NTSB, when they tear down this engine, will know exactly what happened. They'll be looking at the flight data recorder, looking at the maintenance records, looking at the actual engine itself, and they'll be able to tell if, in fact, this was a failure of one of the components of the engine, or if, in fact, something had been ingested into the engine. And
you said this particular plane has a pretty good safety record.
Absolutely. The 737 is the backbone of the commercial air fleet.
And what about Southwest? I mean, as I recall, Southwest has a pretty good safety record as well.
They absolutely do. This is a great airline. They specialize in their main fleet. That's all they normally fly are 737s. So they know the 737s backwards and forwards. They know what the maintenance requirements are. But they, again, everybody is not perfect, and that's how we get some of these incidents. So they're going to be looked at very carefully in their maintenance of this particular aircraft and this engine.
I don't know, Mark, if you got a chance to listen to the passenger that was on the plane describe what happened when he talks about the oxygen masks coming down, but it certainly seemed to him that the crew were just as shocked as the passengers were, and he didn't get a whole lot of information until well after the plane landed. Does that concern you at all?
Not in the least. The business of what the pilots are there to fly the plane first. If they're busy trying to communicate and not thinking about what's happening in the front of that airplane, they're not doing their job. And you got a good result. We landed the airplane. People were able to walk off. The key is to fly that airplane and fly it safely.
So where does this plane go now? Obviously, it can't fly anywhere.
They'll tow it to a hangar, and the NTSB will use it, begin the examination of the engine itself and the rest of the aircraft.
I'm just going to read a quick statement from Southwest. Not a lot of information here, but Southwest Airlines says we are aware that Southwest Flight 1380 from New York LaGuardia to Dallas Love Field was diverted to Philadelphia International. We are in the process of transporting customers and crew into the terminal. The aircraft, a Boeing 737-700, has 143 customers and 5 crew members on board. We are in the process of gathering more information. Safety is always a top priority at Southwest Airlines, and we are working diligently to support our customers and crew at this time. Would it be too early for people from the NTSB to be on the scene, or should that be happening shortly, I suppose?
If they're not there now, they'll be there shortly. They'll be coming from Washington. They'll be coming up with a major team. A board member will probably be joining them to be dealing with the press. But they'll have a crew which will in fact deal with the engine itself, operations, the airframe, the survival factors. This will be a large major investigation.
No, Marty mentioned the woman sitting next to the plane looked like she had been pretty severely injured when the window blew out. When things get pretty rough and there's a rapid descent, are there risks of other injuries? We're not hearing, at least thus far, about anyone else being injured, but I wonder when suddenly those oxygen masks drop, are certain types of passengers particularly vulnerable?
Well, again, certainly depending upon the health of people, that this could scare them. I've heard of heart attacks occurring. Certainly, this is a rapid decompression. The pilot's going to get down as low as he can so that he's got air and not have to worry about the loss of air and passengers passing out. But again, this automatically happens when you get a rapid decompression like that. And of course, the blow-in of the loss of that window would create that situation.
So when you talked about the pilot, wanting to get down as rapidly as possible so that there can be oxygen, that rapid decompression and the rapid descent, is that a result of the decompression, or would that be the pilot also sort of steering the plane down as fast as possible?
No, that's the pilot controlling the airplane, bringing it down below, trying to get it down into an altitude where people may not have to use those masks. Now, they'll keep them on as long as possible, obviously, but at this point, you want to get to an airport as quickly as possible. And again, when you think about it, if the aircraft left LaGuardia, he wasn't in the air very long before this happened and then ultimately got onto the ground.
Yeah. By the time you're a pilot for a plane of this size, can we assume that you've got a lot of flight hours, you probably have a lot of experience under your belt?
Absolutely. And you train for these kind of anomalies. You train in the simulator to have lost an engine, to have had engine fires, to loss of hydraulic and the loss of cabin pressure. All of these things you train for in the simulator itself. So you have plenty of practice knowing what you do with the procedures and how to get this airplane safely onto the ground.
Hey, listen, Mark, I'm kind of curious when you talk about these simulators. I mean, how realistic are they, and how many different sort of scenarios are pilots required to go through?
Well, these are very, very good. We have great fidelity in these simulators. Some have motion, and even those that don't, you can get airsick if you do the wrong thing, if you're not actually sitting in the seat itself, controlling the airplane and observing in there. It is an amazing, good, true life depiction of what's happening in the airplane. And you can do things in the simulator you'd never want to do in the airplane.
That's fascinating. Well, just to remind people of what they're looking at right now and what we're covering right now, there was an emergency landing of a Southwest Airlines plane at Philadelphia International Airport. It had left New York, was on its way to Dallas when, according to a passenger on the plane that we spoke to, there was an explosion. Shortly after that explosion, a window in the 17th row was blown out. We understand that that explosion was the left engine exploding. It forced the plane to rapidly descend, and as I'm talking to Mark Rosenker, former NTSB chairman, also forced the pilot to bring the plane down as quickly as possible. The emergency landing happened without the use, according to the passenger who was on that plane, of the hydraulics, that there was a problem with the hydraulics hydraulics, so the landing was particularly rough. We don't know about injuries except for one. The woman sitting next to that window that was blown out, the passenger says, looked particularly severely injured. He said there was blood everywhere, and almost instantly she sort of slumped into the passenger who was sitting beside